This is my first time posting on Reddit. After reading heaps of stories on here, I can't help but want to share my own let's not meet experience. To give some context, I was 14 when this happened and I was with my best friend Holly, who was 17. We were both very small ladies and obviously at the time very young. It was Friday night and Holly and I had went to her friends for a little get together. Despite both being underage, we drank way too much, and by the time we decided to go home at midnight, we weren't very steady on our feet. We lived in a small city in Canada, and for the most part, it was pretty safe. I was spending the night at Holly's place, and as we were drunk, we took the short bus ride home. The closest bus stop was about 1 kilometer from her place. The bus stop is a parking ride, so there was a well-lit parking lot, and the rest of the walk was on a quiet residential road with no street lighting. We walked this route heaps and didn't think twice about walking it on this particular night. We got off the bus, both still drunk, and enjoying our walk back to hers. We walked through the parking lot, which had a few cars parked, and started into the darkness. Everything was pretty ordinary thus far, but I noticed Holly got quiet and started to walk faster. I figured she was sobering up and keen to get home, so I started walking faster to keep up. She looked at me, seeing I was oblivious to my surroundings, and told me she thought someone was following us. I looked back to see a person walking behind us but a decent distance away. No one else got off the bus with us and no one was around when we got off the bus, so we reckoned this person came from the parking lot. We both started to sober up real quick but tried to rationalize the situation against our gut instincts. We looked behind us every few seconds to gauge the situation and could see the person was gaining on us. We could now make out that the person was a full-grown male. We were both starting to panic and run scenarios through our head when Holly told me we need to run because he has a bat. We both started running, and as I did, I looked behind me to see this dude did have a baseball bat. I can't remember if he was running too or just speed walking, but he was still following us. I remember feeling this horrible urgency and panic overcome me and survival instincts kick in. Holly and I both knew we could not stop running until we were inside with the door locked. I knew from running track that if you look behind you while running, you slow down. Against all my instincts, I didn't look behind me, and after what seemed like ages, we made it home. We ran into the house shaking and crying, and luckily Holly's dad was awake. We told him what happened, and he had us call the cops while he got in his car. He wanted to drive the road to see if he could find the dude and get a better description for the police, but he didn't see him. I'm not sure when we lost him or if he followed us all the way home, but nothing ever came of the situation. It's been over 10 years since this went down, and I try not to think about what could have happened. But the thought of a grown dude waiting in his car with a baseball bat for vulnerable people to walk by gives me goosebumps. I'm a 20-year-old female, and the story that I'm going to tell you happened just recently. I had many creepy encounters and experienced a lot of truly scary things during my life, so I figured this would be the right place to collect all of it. My mother and I decided to go grocery shopping together 2 days ago. So we took the car and she drove to the nearest and biggest mall to get as many supplies as possible. Because of the ongoing lockdown for the pandemic, it's better to make only a few trips to avoid unnecessary contact with people. It took us a while to arrive there, and once we did, she pulled up near the stores where I could see a couple of men. It is very common in my area to find people stationed in malls and supermarket parking lots, and they're usually quite harmless if you do as they say. They stay there waiting for cars to come, and when this happens, they show the driver some parking spots to ask what is called a protection fee. Basically, you pay them or otherwise they would damage your vehicle. It is, of course, illegal, but the government here doesn't really seem bothered by these kinds of activities. Anyway, we met those illegal workers many times before, so it wasn't something too scary for us. At first. My mother parked the car, and then 2 of the men came near her window and asked for the fee, which wasn't much, luckily. While she was giving them the money, I looked out of the side I was sitting in and then froze. There were at least 10 other men. 2 of them were fighting, I don't know over what, and one threw a punch too. Only when I looked closer I saw something shiny. In his grip there was a knife. I started freaking out internally because the situation was way more dangerous than it seemed at the beginning. The worst scenarios were running through my head. 2 women, 10 men with a weapon. I was then brought back to reality when my mother told me to get out of the car to reach the stores. So I immediately jumped out of the seat and got by her side ready to protect her. But when I saw she was chatting and exchanging jokes with one of the 2 dudes from before, I realized she hadn't seen the group of men that was coming toward us. My mom has a very sunny and friendly personality, which, let me tell you, can be a very dangerous thing around strangers. I'm not blaming her, I love my mother, but an excessive, expansive attitude can cost you a lot. I know I sometimes come off as antisocial, but better be careful and distant than having a knife on your throat. I quickly told her we had to go, with urgency in my voice but keeping a cold and firm tone. If you show people you're scared, then you are screwed. You must never show it, because it makes you an easier target. She followed me, asking what was wrong, and tried to tell me that we were safe, so I whispered, "Keep going and stay silent." And only then she saw the group of men staring at us. She proceeded to look in another direction while walking, but I didn't. I gave one of the men a look full of hatred that was screaming, "Do not try to harm us or I will fight." I knew they were numerically superior, but I had been practicing boxing for years, so I wasn't going down without battling for my mother's life. The man got the message and looked away. It was still daytime, so if I screamed, people would hear us and call the cops. Plus, criminals prefer, as I said before, easy and weak targets. I haven't brought weapons with me that day. I usually do, but I'll make sure to never commit this mistake again. We got out the mall when it was getting dark. I suggested a secondary way to get to the car. The men were all still in the parking lot. There was little light, and we also had a lot of things to bring with us now. We made it to the vehicle safely because they didn't see us coming, but I swear I'm never going to forget my weapons from now on. Also, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't looked out my window or my mom hadn't listened to me. So, always remember, be aware of your surroundings. Just to give some context, I'm currently in the UK and the town where I live is known for its drug scene, but it doesn't have a violent crime problem to speak of. I think that's why I found what happened so shocking, because I lived in London before, and while some messed up stuff did happen to me there, it was nowhere near on the level of what happened to me earlier this year. My partner and I live together in our flat, which is in a relatively busy residential area. I work from home, however, and he's out of the flat quite a lot, so I guess it might look to an outside observer that I live alone. Our flat complex was once an old factory, and we have these huge industrial windows, so people walking on the street have a pretty clear view of our dining room, which is where I would work during the day. It all started in July of this year. I'm ashamed to say that I can be a major rubbernecker, and a lot of drama occurs on the road outside of our flat. So I look out of the windows often during my workday for some light entertainment. The best was a 2-hour breakup I got to watch unfold in the car just below our window, but that's beside the point. One day, I got up to make myself a cup of tea, looked out the kitchen window, and saw this guy just staring at me. I was struck by how intense it was and how he didn't look away, even when it was obvious that I was looking back at him. I felt creeped out by it, but I tried not to let it bother me. We have a lot of drug addicts and other weird characters that hang out around here, so it didn't seem like such a big deal. I went back to work, and by the time I sat down at the table, he was gone. About a week later, my partner had gone to visit his dad for the weekend, so I was excited to hunker down and catch up on some of my favorite shows alone. After about 30 minutes, the buzzer to the flat went. The buzzer is so loud, and it scared the heck out of me. I was lucky my popcorn didn't go flying out of my hands. Now, our flat complex has this big porch where teenagers and addicts love to hang out because it provides shelter from the rain, and about 4 people can sit down inside of it. Sometimes people lean up on the buzzers by accident when they're hanging out in the porch, so I assumed that was what happened. After a few seconds, however, the buzzer went again, and again, and again. Someone was pressing it in this rhythmic pattern. It's something I know my partner does when he's forgotten his keys, and it's kind of our code for me to let him in, which is why I found it so disconcerting. At first, I was worried he might have missed the bus to his dad's house and had decided to come back to the flat. I was nearly about to buzz him straight in when I thought it would be a good idea to pick up the phone first and check who it was. As soon as I picked up the phone, the person standing near the intercom must have heard because they said hello. It was definitely not my partner. I asked who it was and why they were buzzing the flat so late at night, but all they said was, "Can you let me in?" I asked them why they wanted to come in, and they said, "You invited me, remember?" While they were talking, they kept kind of laughing under their breath, and the whole exchange put me on edge. I told them I had no idea who they were and just hung up. I was half expecting them to start pressing the buzzer again, but they didn't. After a few minutes, I crept out of the flat to have a look at who was on the porch, but they were long gone. My partner has to get up for work early, whereas I'm more of a night owl. Most nights I'm up until around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. working on my laptop while he's asleep. A few nights after the intercom incident, I was on my laptop watching YouTube videos, and I realized that we'd forgotten to take the trash out. This happens a lot, and it's not uncommon for me to take the trash out around 1 to 2 a.m. At least, it wasn't until all this happened. I put my slippers on, grabbed the bag of trash, and took it out to the curb outside the flat's main entrance. When I looked across the street, there was this guy standing on the opposite street corner. He was watching me, and his eyes followed me all the way from the front door to the curb. I noticed he was smoking, so I assumed he lived in one of the houses across the street. I remember even thinking, wouldn't it be creepy if he tried to come over here? As I put the trash bag down, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw him walking in a straight line across the road towards me, with his eyes fixed on me the entire time. I don't know how to describe it, but the look on his face filled me with this instinctive sense of dread. It felt like someone had just turned my stomach inside out. I pulled my keys out of my hoodie pocket, turned around, and ran to the front door. I've never felt this kind of fear before, and it was like my body was compelling me to get as far away from this man as possible. I got into the building, slammed the door behind me, and rushed to my flat without looking back. I didn't want to know whether he'd follow me or not. I told my partner about the whole thing the next day and how shook up I was. We'd agreed that we'd be more proactive with the trash, and I've never taken it out late at night again. Fast forward to the beginning of August, about 2 weeks after the trash incident, and I'd pretty much forgotten about all of it. I was still too scared to go out late at night on the road, but nothing weird had happened since then. I went to bed at about 2 a.m., but I felt restless for some reason and struggled to get to sleep. By about 3 a.m., I was contemplating whether or not to give up and go do something else when I heard this scream. The sound cut right through me. There was something visceral about the terror in that scream. I knew it was bad because my partner went from stone cold asleep to being up in a shot. He asked me what it was, and I said I didn't know. I went to the window straight away and looked out. Down one of the side roads near our flat, I could see headlights but couldn't get a clear view of the car. The screaming continued in bursts, and after a while, I could make out words. It was a woman, and she was saying, get out," over and over again. I'm used to hearing all kinds of domestic arguments take place on the road outside of our flat, particularly since we're near the university and several popular bars, but this was different. There was this raw fear in her voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned to my partner and said I had to call the police. When the police picked up, I explained what was happening. They seemed disinterested at first, but the operator's tone changed when I told them where it was. I think they must have been getting calls from all around the area about it. It was sometime during this phone call that I heard a screech of tires and the screaming stopped. The operator asked me to go to the window and describe to them what was happening. When I looked down, there was this black car sat on the road. One of the neighbors from across the road was speaking to the two guys in the car. I had to twist to get a good look at them, but one of the guys in the car looked uncannily like the guy who had been watching me when I was putting out the trash that time. At first, the conversation seemed congenial, but it took a turn when their neighbor asked them some sort of question that I couldn't hear clearly, and they sped off down the road. Within no less than 10 minutes, 3 police cars arrived and had blocked off the roads leading to our flat. Our residential area is on a grid system. They were knocking on doors and asking to speak to all of our neighbors. I told my partner that we should go out and speak to them, since we saw a lot of what happened, and my partner had the foresight to write down the license plate of the black car. When we went out, there were these 2 girls talking to one of the police officers. They were both shaking, and one of them looked as though she had been crying. I decided to stand nearby and wait for the girls to finish before speaking with the officer myself. What they said made my blood run cold. They were from one of the houses that looked out directly onto the road where I had seen the headlights, so they had a clear view of what had happened. Like us, they had been alerted by the screaming and gone straight to the window. From what they could gather, the black car had cut off a small red car on the road, like pulled right in front of it, and that's what had caused the girl driving the red car to scream the first time. They thought it might have been some kind of misunderstanding, but they watched as one of the guys from the black car got out, walked to the red car, and jumped in through the window. That's the point where the girl must have been screaming, "Get out, get out." There had been a struggle, and the girls watching said they assumed the guy was just trying to steal the car, but then he forced the driver into the back seat, and that's when he drove off. The 2 girls were both hysterical by this point. You could tell they felt guilty for not intervening. I could feel that same guilt seeping into my thoughts as well. After the guy had driven off in the red car, the 2 men in the black car had gone the opposite way and turned the corner onto our road, but had been stopped by another neighbor. Although this neighbor had been alerted by the screaming, he hadn't actually witnessed what happened, so he had stopped the black car to ask the guys what was going on without knowing they were involved. That was the exchange we saw. When the guy started acting suspicious, he asked if they would wait for the police to arrive, and that's the point when they drove off. It wasn't until we got back to the flat that I started to put 2 and 2 together. I have a small red car just like the one that the girls had described, and I normally come back at night on that day of the week, since it's the day I go visit my parents. I had only come back early on this particular occasion because I needed to let a plumber in to do some work on the flat. What if they had been waiting for me, and they had gotten the wrong car? Over the next few days, I contacted the police several times and checked the local news, but I never heard anything about the girl who was kidnapped. I still have no idea what happened to her. All I know is that they found her car abandoned somewhere not far from where she was taken, but she wasn't in it. It still gives me chills just thinking about it.